Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. We're going to give this just a few more minutes so people can kind of come into the webinar. Um, and so we'll just give it a couple minutes here. But just to introduce myself, my name is Veronica. I'm here with Team NAT. And yeah, I'm really excited to be hosting this. This is part 3 of the Energy Smart Therapist with Kara Lovehart. And yeah, we're really excited. The first 2 sessions were really engaging and fun, and we're excited to bring you to this third part. There will be a presentation, and then after the presentation, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or hold on to them until the end of the session, and we will get to you. To access this webinar, everyone was emailed a link if you had pre-registered for the course. But if you haven't pre-registered for the course, you can always access the live stream through your account page. This would be going onto our website, www.neilasher.com, signing in using the same email that you used to purchase the course, going to My Account. Once you're in My Account, you'll see a toolbar on the left-hand side, and there's a button that says My Courses. Click on that, and it will take you to the kind of webinar page. And you can access it there. You will have lifetime access to this course material, the video, these slides, and the workbook. And then starting tomorrow, we will have the exam go live, and you can take the exam to finish the course and finish the course and get your CEUs and certificates. Feel free to put in the chat where you're from, say hi. But other than that, we're about 3 minutes past, 3 minutes past 7 o'clock, or two-ish minutes past 7 o'clock. We'll give it maybe 1 more minute as I see people are just starting to hop on, and then we'll get going. All right. Well, it looks like we've got a good group here, so I guess we'll get started. And of course, people can trickle in along the way. But yeah, let's get this thing going. And so I will hand it over to Kara, and yes, take it away.
Thanks, Veronica. Welcome back, everyone, to part 3. So part 1, as we'll recap here, we did a understanding of the neuroscience of empathy. And then last week, we went over the embodied boundary skills, so the somatic skills that we taught. So this was using our nervous system, posture, breath, grounding, diaphragmatic breathing, orienting, so looking. And we looked at the embodied neutrality stance, so with body language. So I'm curious if you used any of the tools from last week. Did you notice any changes that you felt? So if you were tracking or energy mapping with your clients between sessions, did any of the somatic tools help? So just check in with yourself. What was that like for you? Were you able to catch yourself if you had any moments where you were merging with your clients and then maintain that separation? So just kind of think about that and see how you've integrated the first 2 parts already. So today we're going to go through burnout prevention and recovery. Big one for all of us massage therapists. We'll talk about energy hygiene, which includes clearing and resetting, recovery, how to restore after any sort of emotional draining that we might have. The resilience, we want to increase our window of tolerance to stress, to our client load, because this is how we build our practice and maintain our practice for the longevity of our practice. We're going to talk about flow states and the science of optimal work rhythm. That's really cool. And then we'll talk about burnout proofing. So with energy hygiene and recovery, this is in general, we're going to talk about how to discharge emotional buildup, how to reset between clients, and then tools we can restore your vagal tone. With the science of flow states, again, I talked about this. I really love this because this is something I learned a couple years back to support the cycles that we go through naturally, the rhythms, so we can recover our neurotransmitters and sustain our practice. So with the outcomes for this particular part 3, we're going to look at the burnout factors that are in therapeutic work and evidence-based self-care recovery strategies, energetic and emotional restoration methods that are science-based, and then a personal self-care plan for sustainable practice. So let's talk about understanding burnout. Let's start with that. The World Health Organization's definition of burnout is three core symptoms of burnout. Emotional exhaustion. So this is feeling drained, overwhelmed, or overly tired. This is not having a buffer between like clients where you're just feeling completely like, I can't do anymore. And B is depersonalization or dehumanization. So if you feel detached, numb, your empathy is kind of down, if you're going through the emotions or losing your compassion or presence, that's a sign. You could also think of this as like the ethics could drop. So, if you've had this sense of like, do I really want to change the sheets? Do I want to just fluff them over? Like these types of things that people might go through. And I've talked to a lot of people in this field that have had the burnout, like these things that they just start to happen to them. The third World Health Organization's definition of burnout is reduced efficacy. This is feeling less effective or capable. So maybe you're not able to be on and problem solving for the client with the techniques and you're using your modalities. If you lose confidence in your skills and you're feeling like maybe I'm just not good at this anymore, or if you just have like nothing left to give, you're completely done. So those are the 3 things to look out for. Again, we're looking at the emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced efficacy. Now, there's also the physiology of burnout. This is nervous system breakdown. So with that, we're looking at the stress system, particularly the hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis. This becomes overloaded when cortisol is being imbalanced through a lot of work, through stress, chronic fatigue, brain fog, or immune system suppression. So early burnout symptoms when it comes to cortisol, let's just talk about that. If you are feeling wired and tired, so this is where you're working a lot and maybe at night you're not being able to relax or unwind, but you're feeling like you could do more. You're wired, you're not able to relax or down regulate. This is maybe high cortisol levels that have been spiking or stay high for a long time, but not long term. So that's an early burnout warning sign. Late burnout signs is that the cortisol is completely low. It's dropped. Your system cannot pump any more out. This is where you might feel foggy or numb or just things feel flat. So that's something to really pay attention to. Just simple high cortisol levels make you wired and tired. It's an early burnout sign. If you don't actually use these tools to downregulate, you will get into the late burnout, which is high cortisol and flat. So that's important. Well, also the physiological signs are vagus nerve disruption. So if your chronic stress leads to reduced vagal tone, remember we talked about in the last time that vagal tone is the nerve that allows us to relax and allows us to move into a down-regulated state. When it's less toned, you're going to have less ability to relax easily. So this will lead to shallow breathing, increased sensitivity, emotional reactivity, poor recovery between sessions, and if you're tracking your heart rate variability, you might have lower heart rate variability. So example of that with vagus nerve disruption, you might feel overstimulated even after like ordinary work days. So not like a high client load day. Maybe you only have 2 or 3 or 4 clients. I don't know what your max for your client level is, but you might have just a little bit more overwhelm on a normal, not overwhelming day. I also want to talk about the difference between empathic fatigue and compassion fatigue. So here, empathic fatigue, this is where we feel what others feel so much that our system becomes overloaded. So we talked about that last time, the first 2 parts. Again, absorbing clients' emotions, becoming anxious without knowing, or like that somatic stress in the body, that you're feeling it in the body. Now, compassion fatigue is a little bit different. This is a gradual depletion of your emotional resources for caring. So you might care less, you might be less empathic, reduced empathy, numbness, irritability, or complete emotional shutdown. And you might recognize these signs in not maybe yourself possibly, but think about other coworkers that you might know. These are interesting things to watch, not just in yourself, but in others, especially if they haven't taken this course and don't have the resources to be aware of burnout. One of our practitioners that works with us is a registered nurse. She's a holistic nurse, and one of her dissertation for her PhD was on burnout. And she says you'd be surprised that she did self-awareness testing for most nurses. Most of them don't even have this self-awareness that they are burned out. And this is where the education of what burnout looks like, we need to have that, not just for the massage field, but for all the caregiving fields. Now let's talk about why massage therapists are at high risk. There are high levels of attunement for us. We're really checking in, we're being aware all the time of our clients. We are constantly co-regulating with our clients. We have that physical labor. Obviously, our job is physically taxing, but there's also emotional labor layered together with that. Sometimes there's minimal transition times between sessions, depending on where you work. That 5-minute changeover can be really harsh for the system for some of those places people work at. There can be boundary challenges, whether it's the team you're working for, the organization you're working for, or yourself, that those challenges we talked about boundaries last time can be confiscated. And in the massage field, there is a tendency to overgive, to fawn, to people please. So we are, again, a higher risk for burnout because of that. And then also because this high load of stress, you could call it chronic stress. Some places would define it as trauma. My definition of that is just the nervous system not being able to downregulate in a person. Whether it's PTSD or just chronic stress, the nervous system is reacting similarly. So we're involved, our work is involved touching a lot of people's lives, and most people culturally in this world now, whether they don't have PTSD, has a chronic stress level that is a lot more taxing to us when we're interacting with them. So the high volume clients are also a thing. So if you have a lot more clients than most people, so it depends on where you're working, that can be a huge system overload. I think that's something that is very important to be aware of. We also could have resonance load, which is where we're matching our clients' breathing. We talked about this last time. We're syncing with their nervous system. We're feeling tension patterns, and we're attuned to their emotional cues. So thinking about all the things from part 1 and part 2, why we are a higher industry for burnout. 7 years is the average massage therapist before they are done. And that we need to change that, right? We need us out in the field doing this work. Mirror neuron fatigue and limbic system drain. We talked about that last time too. So when we get heavy, we get irritable, we have difficulty being present. Maybe we're over-identifying with our clients' problems, and then feeling the body aches that are not ours. They're our clients. So all of these things lead to this whole burnout for our field. We don't really get a lot of rest as well. Like I said, sometimes you only get 5 minutes between clients. We're eating standing up. We don't have hydration. Sometimes people are just not eating. I know some of our staff, we have snacks for our staff and make sure they hydrate. And we have a 30 minutes changeover time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with rhythms and the flow states today about why that's important if you're able to do that in your practice. Our field also has limited peer support and supervision or community. So we're emotionally isolated, maybe in our rooms all day by ourselves, maybe not a lot of place to process things that come up, and we get limited feedback, unless we work for an organization that supports that. So here's some evidence-based practices that can support our self-care, because self-care is the way that we can support ourselves, not leading to burnout. Obviously, the awareness of part 1 and part 2, all these things are laying the groundwork, but now we're going to go into tools and techniques that we can support ourselves. Last time was the somatic regulation techniques that we can use in between sessions. We can still use those as self-care as well, but these practices are really between our work days. Things that we can do on a regular basis at home for our self-care practice. The HRV, biofeedback devices, we talked about that. That's a really great way for us to start monitoring and tracking, even at home, to make sure that we are getting out of that stress response. Yoga and mindfulness increases vagal tone. It increases our interoception, our body awareness, remember that. And it does support shifting the brain waves into an alpha theta state, calming states. which is really good for us when we're off work, right? Moderate exercise is really also great, 20 to 30 minutes of walking, cycling, swimming. I know that everyone has a different disposition too, so you have to know what your workout style is. I have a sister who's a very high, fiery, adrenal personality. She's a go-getter. She's a overdoer, and she actually burns herself out because she was pushing so hard at the gym. She just used that all or nothing personality at the gym to keep going. And some people that they need to get that out to feel regulated. So really you have to listen to your body, but in general, the evidence-based practices are moderate exercise, not extreme. That depends if you're an athlete or anything like that too, because you might be a sports massage therapist and you might have a higher window of tolerance for movement, right? You might need that bigger workout. But in general, the evidence is for moderate exercise. Nature exposure, I call it green time. So being outside under the trees in nature, that's also very supportive. And the evidence supports barefoot walking as well. Anything that increases your visual, when we talked about moving into the expanding your field of vision. So when you're out in nature, one thing that your system will start to regulate when you see like big, broad landscapes. And you can actually hack your system a little bit by picking up some high resolution photos on Google, maybe looking up beaches or forests, things that are really like a broad landscape photo. But there's something about landscapes that can tend to relax us. We have a lot of landscape pictures in our rooms actually for the clients, for their regulation. Not necessarily like abstract photos, but like actual real nature landscapes, because that's research to support the system in relaxing. Social connection and co-regulation. I know sometimes at the end of our practice, we want to just be by ourselves. We have a lot of overload sometimes, especially if we're very sensitive. But processing circles with your peers, talking to another therapist, and having a place where you really feel that you're supported in your system, that co-regulation with friends and colleagues, or even people, family outside of work. And if you are interested in finding a mentor or supervision, I think that that's something that you can look through your local networking groups, if you have those. I think that's important because the emotional and energetic load that happens if we have someone that we can connect with, even if we trade with a therapist that's outside of our practice, that can be supportive as well. I think that that's something that's doesn't happen a lot. We have a group in our area, so I encourage you to look for one, and even online groups and spaces too. It can be very supportive. So we'll talk a little bit more about grounding. We talked about grounding practices last time when it comes to being physically aware of the body in coupling with that visualization, that internal imagining that you are having roots grow out of your feet. That's both grounding, but the grounding practice that we're talking here is specifically shown measurable effects to reduce inflammation markers. This is barefoot walking on the ground, outside in nature, improved heart rate variability, decreased cortisol, improved sleep, and reduced pain perception. So there's research behind that. Cold exposure and hydrotherapy, and this may not be for everyone, but cold actually activates the diving reflex, and that stimulates the vagus nerve and raises your heart rate variability. So it doesn't necessarily have to be for a full cold plunge. This might be just cold water on the face, maybe a cold or a cool shower. But what it does is it supports getting your system out of over-identification with another. Again, this is kind of a grounding technique because it shifts you back into the present, fully into your body, because the difference in temperature there. You can even use like maybe an ice pack on your upper chest or your neck if you're not into cold plunging. That's something that also is research-based. The third one here is one of my favorite. It's somatic shaking or rhythmic movement. So this is something could be as simple as sitting on a rocking chair and rocking gently or maybe vigorously. This is based on the polyvagal theory and trauma release exercises. So shaking lowers the high tone sympathetic activation. It discharges muscular bracing, so this holding on that we might have from our interactions from the stressful day. And it actually does reset limbic overcoupling, so our limbic system matching and mirroring the emotional state of our clients. Your body will unconsciously tense when you co-regulate with clients. Remember that. So shaking releases what you picked up. So this is something I often do in my practice. I might just put my hands, like I'm going to put them up so you can see them on the camera, but I might have them down by my sides and just shaking them. And it was something really interesting. It's very discharging to the system. And I did mention Dr. Robert Melillo last time, and he was talking a little bit about those children on the spectrum that do what they call the stimming. What the stimming is, it's this, most of them is trying to discharge this excess nervous system stimulation. So rhythmic rocking, movement, shaking can be very supportive for that. You can also do dancing too. If you like to move, dance, bounce lightly on your heels, that can be very supportive. Number 4 is vocal toning, humming. So this supports the vagus nerve. It really will support relaxing the diaphragm, and it can increase heart rate variability and support the limbic system as well. We talked about visualization and breath work, so we're not going to go over that again, but that is the research for supporting a self-care practice. And number 6 I want to cover is ritual. I think this is something that we don't take advantage of often. And this doesn't have to be something that's a religious sort of thing. Dr. David Hamilton's research, he has a really great book called Why Woo Woo Works. It's a great book. Ritual helps us because the meaning we put behind the ritual, whatever that is. It could be a ritual every day of you sit down with your cup of coffee, your cup of tea, and you're sitting down and saying, I'm going to have a good day on purpose, and thinking that as your mantra while you're sipping the tea. These coupling with a physical action, so ritual meaning a physical representation of a mental process. So whatever you're mentally thinking of, putting a physical representation along with that. Now, of course, we have intention and maybe religious beliefs behind some of rituals that incorporate candles or prayer or mantra. So if you don't have a ritual, this is something you can do no matter if you have a religious belief or not. The science behind this is that intention, belief, and the expectation we have about the meaning we put behind the belief activates physiological changes in the brain and the body. That includes releasing endorphins, dopamine, relaxing the system so we move into a parasympathetic state, improve the immune function, increase the heart rate variability, and help support the nervous system and regulation. So essentially, it's like an energetic coherence through psychological pathways. So we're really allowing ourselves to believe whatever it is. And you could use whatever. Some people use prayer, intention setting, like I said, a cup of coffee, or whatever, essential oils, whatever feels good for you. And again, they don't work because they're magic, but they activate the nervous system's safe pathways. One of the things I think that we covered the basics here for science-based self-care practices. But I want to also include that a lot of this stuff goes even beyond this. And I'm going to cover just integrating the mind-body lens briefly here. So we want to understand that your personal inputs, this is what you put into your body, will shape your sensitivity and your resilience and your energy. So we are understanding this neuroscience of empathy, energy boundaries, and then burnout resilience here. But more things that we do during our day from mind-body's perspective lens can also influence our systems here. So we'll think of our nervous system like an ecosystem. Everything we take in, whether it's physically, emotionally, even vibrationally, will influence our sensitivity and our boundary strength and our ability to co-regulate without absorbing. So this is where we want to become aware of these things because it increases our resilience with our clients. Increased resilience prevents burnout, increases our window of tolerance for more clients we can see or better quality clients we can see. Again, this leads to more income, longer term in the field, and not leaving after 7 years. So let's talk about the first one, biological input of food. So food will potentially impact our system because it may or may not increase inflammation. This is something that's so simple. Food's high in sugar. We don't know, but they might increase inflammation for your particular body type. Dehydration, skipping meals. All of these reduce vagal tone and they make you more energetically and emotionally permeable. So eating sugar is known to activate the amygdala, so make us more reactive emotionally. High inflammatory meals make us more fatigued during sessions, and hydration actually does increase our heart rate variability. So these are important. The other thing is, and these are just examples of things, I have a full mind-body course for avoiding burnout for massage therapists. So if you're interested in that, let us know at the end. I can tell you more about it. But we cover more of these things, such as color and frequency. So we know that we have biophoton receptors in our skin and in our eyes. So we're absorbing color and frequency, and especially for people who are more energetically sensitive, neurodivergent, you're going to be more impacted by it. So this is why we have the use of blue blocking glasses when people are using screens on on an everyday basis. Say they work on their computer all day and they're getting that blue frequency of light put into their body. That activates the body to be more awake, and it can mess with the circadian rhythms, affect melatonin production. And again, over time, if you're not getting that deep sleep, that can lead to this burnout. The system's just not being able to regulate and restore at nighttime. Some of the work we talk about is by Dr. Peter Mandel. We talk about the difference in wavelengths and how they affect the system. So think about yourself if you're in a room that's full of warm colors or a red room, how that can influence. There's a lot of research and science behind it. Actually increases blood pressure and hunger. So that's stimulating to the system because we're absorbing, again, through the eye, the color, and through our skin. So we can have that extra stress response all the time if we're in a red room. Another example is Baker Miller pink is a color they put in hospitals and in prisons because it's known to calm the system. When you're waiting in a hospital emergency room, they want the people to be calm. Same with people in prison. So there are interesting psychological and physiological impacts to color. And that's another thing we need to be aware of. What do those, you can track those things too. What colors or frequencies of light are impacting me? You know, if you work in an office that you have fluorescent lights, is that something that you're really sensitive to? Do you need more of an LED light? Is that too bright? Do you need soft white light bulbs in your room? These are things, if you have the power to adjust those in your practice, can make or break your system, especially. Again, we are very attuned to our environment as therapists. So these little things can make a big difference. Vibration is also an important thing you can check out. Certain frequencies can raise HRV, and we can talk about there's different binaural music that work with in training different hemispheres of the brain that can shift someone more into an alpha or theta brainwave state, especially if you're stuck in that beta brainwave. We talked about that last time, which is the highly focused, highly alert brainwave, which is good to be in there. But if you're always in there and you can't downregulate, you want to be able to learn to relax and get into those other states. All right. Let's see here. If you want to learn more about that, we have so much more information. The Mind Body Lens is like one of my most interesting, and I'm so intrigued by all that stuff. Let's talk about the science of flow states. So we talked earlier about these different work cycles, and I know that when I learned about the different flow states and time blocks, it made a huge difference not only in my practice and how I set the time for between clients for a down regulation period, but it made me have the ability to see more clients in a day, and it worked for most of our staff. So it was really, really cool. So flow states it's a state where deep focus is happening. This is usually during our session. We talked about this last time. This is where time will feel different. Your mind and body will maybe sync. Distraction may just completely get away. You're just sort of like right there. You're fully present. This is where performance and creativity increase. So athletes, and a lot of athletes and that whole field studies the science of flow states because they want to get in that peak performance. Well, really, as massage therapists, in a way, we're athletes. We have a job to do to be in a hyper-focused state and move into these different states of awareness, whether we're problem solving at the intake, knowing what muscle groups we're working on, what techniques, what modalities, and then moving into a state of maybe alpha beta brainwave, theta brainwave between or in the session so that we don't have that hyperfixated state for too long. Because that's where the nervous system can get locked in, and then we can have this draining of our energy. So the research-based markers of flow are balance, challenge, and skill. So if something is too challenging for us, if you're learning something new, say you have to do your taxes, right? This is the tax season time of year. It's a little bit extra, right? Focused if you do them on yourself, on your own, if you do like a TurboTax thing, and it's not something you do every day. So there's a little bit of a challenge to the system, to the brain. And then there's some skill that needs to be learned. There needs to be a nice balance between the ability to practice the skills that you're learning or the skills you already know and having a challenge that's not too much. And this is where if you are someone that and many therapists that are this way, they're very curious. They want to learn a lot of modalities, but they try to learn them all too close together, right? You want to learn every month a new modality, but then you haven't had that space to integrate yet. Then there's a little bit the balance of challenge and integrating the skill might be off. So there might then be a more like intellectual burnout and not being able to fully integrate the modality in. So that's important because we want to, in what you're learning, what you're doing, what you're integrating into your practice, things should be challenging, but not to the point where it's like, this is way too much. I don't know enough about this particular client issue to help them. And I feel like every time I'm getting stressed, right? Think about that. If you have client after client after client, you don't feel confident in doing what you need to do, and the challenge to skill ratio is a little off, that can really put your system in that stress mode. In the 90-minute workflow, let's talk about that. So human attention will physically have performance, a natural cycle of performance, what's called the ultradian rhythms, which is a 90-minute cycle. So when you are sitting in a classroom like this, we don't go for more than an hour for these webinars, which is great. But if we're at the 90-minute mark, I would say, and we were maybe doing a 3-hour workshop, I would say, let's take a break now. Because 90 minutes, 45 to 90 minutes is about the maximum time that your peak focus will last. And recovery is then going to be required afterwards. So think about this if you are doing either work at home, if you run your own practice and you have to do administrative work, or if you are in your practice seeing clients. A 90-minute, 45 to 90-minute window of time is about the time before we need to have a break. So what we offer for our staff here is a 60-minute session and 30-minute break between. Now they can change it to 15 minutes if they've increased their window of tolerance, their ability to be resilient and feel not burned out. Like they've been like, I'm good with 10 minutes and soap notes and drink and snack and doing some of this integration work with breath and somatic practices, then they're good. But if you do a 90-minute session, absolutely, you need a little bit more time if possible. Same thing with if you're doing work at home, any sort of 90-minute cycle of email answering, calling clients, any sort of paperwork, financial stuff, whatever that is. If you're getting past that 90-minute space, 45 to 90 minutes, everyone's a little bit different, and you're starting to get fatigued and you're trying to push and say, maybe drink another sip of my coffee to get through it. That's where our systems, our culture teaches us that, the 3 cups a day or whatever, how many people are drinking coffee a lot and stimulants to get through their life. And our systems are not made for that. So if we can understand the flow cycle, we can be in it for the cycle, take a break, do some of this breath down regulation, maybe staring at a wall, increasing our field of vision. So we're just regulating ourselves and not moving into that intellectual thinking state. This includes during your breaks, not going and watching something while you're eating. This is really common with our mobile little computers, our little phones, to do scrolling or look at emails or answer text messages. And instead of just eating, being fully present with your food, getting your system to be in a space where it can then go on to the next. So that's a really important thing. Without recovery, we're going to have the signs: irritability, sensory overload, or fatigue. So 60 to 90-minute sessions. Again, these are most of our services are 60 to 90 minutes. This fits perfect in this neurological window of a flow state. So if you allow the recovery afterwards. Now, why the recovery matters. So during this time, when we're taking a break to we're actually replenishing our neurotransmitters, because flow, when you're in that state, you're getting work done, you're doing that focused session on the client. We do deplete dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and acetylcholine. So we want to replenish those through downregulated states. And this is why people are talking about dopamine detoxes. If you've heard that, there's too much scrolling, we get enough of that, and then we're basically crashed. So it's a problem for a lot of people, and I encourage you, if that's something you haven't been aware of, to say that might be contributing to your sensitivity or your if you are experiencing burnout symptoms already, that can be something you can quickly just stop in the middle if you have that recovery window. So after the intense presence, that flow state, right, your brain will need to replenish. And if you don't recover, this is where you're going to have those signs of emotional reactivity. Your boundaries will weaken, your sensitivity will heighten, your decision-making drops, and then you'll have empathy overload that will hit faster. Let's see here for fatigue, leaks, and micro expressions, breath, and posture. So how fatigue leaks out of your body. Let's talk about that. When we're not doing this recovery state, whatever, if it's between our clients or between our work days where we're having a self-care practice, if we're not using the emotional embodiment or the somatic embodiment techniques, taking a 30-minute break, a 10-minute break, a micro break between our clients. Again, not everyone has the benefit of having 30 minutes, but you can still have this downregulation period in 5-10 minutes. If you're ignoring recovery, the body's going to start signaling depletion through micro cues. Let's talk about those. So micro expressions. If you're noticing that you're having like a subtle frown, if your eyes start to feel like tight, you're just starting to clench. If you're feeling facial fatigue. So this is where clients will then subconsciously pick these up, right? That co-regulation when we're doing our intakes will suffer from the client. If you notice your breathing is shallow, you have more chest breathing instead of that diaphragmatic belly breath. Or if you're feeling like you have an inconsistent rhythm of your breathing. So it's getting fast or slow. It's just not in a nice flow. That's good to notice. And then posture. So when we get in this slumped posture, we're starting to maybe protect or starting to move out of this relaxed state. If we have a collapsed chest, rounding our shoulders, these are more open loops that energetically absorb more from clients. So we want to be watching for that. So the simple ways we can work with recovery and build it into our work day. Again, we talked about these last time, but I'll just refresh us so we have them fresh in our mind. 2 to 5 minutes of diaphragmatic breathing. Shake out your hands, shake out your spine. Make sure we drink water. Some people, if your doctor's okay with this, electrolytes are really great. People are all about the rave for electrolytes, but I encourage you to make sure it's okay with your doctor because some people have kidney issues and there's extra minerals and things like that in those electrolyte powders. But hydration, beyond maybe just regular water, hydration powder can be very supportive for sensitive systems. I call it like the WD-40 of a sensitive nervous system is minerals and hydration powders. Step outside, be outside if you can between breaks, get your feet on the ground. Do that quick body scan to keep that awareness of energy mapping of where you're absorbing stuff. And then that heart focused coherent breathing. So we can do so many of these different tools, like in 2 minutes time, right? It doesn't have to take a lot. So for the personal self-care plan, early warning signs. So let's just see if you've experienced any of these, or maybe if you're currently experiencing any of these. So irritability or numbness after sessions or after your day. These are more signs that your limbic system is overloaded. You could be functioning on like that low vagal tone, and your empathy and your patience drop. So examples, if you snap at a loved one or maybe even a colleague, if you feel nothing after an emotional day and you're just completely bleh. And you could also have the signs, early warning signs, you crash immediately when you come home. And I think most of the therapists that I've taught this class for or come into my restorative touch class, I have a class that's massage for chronic stress and trauma. This is something we talk about, and this is common, very, very common. I'd love to hear in the chats too if you feel like you've experienced this. And if you do on a regular basis, how many days of the work week is it that you come home and you just crash? And that's okay. There's no shame around this. This is a self-awareness technique to be aware of this pattern and all the cool tools you can use to hopefully alleviate that. Another warning sign is loss of empathy, compassion, fatigue. If you're feeling detached, disassociated during sessions, if you dread when certain clients come to see you, and that's normal if some of the clients are more draining, but if you are just having a shorter fuse, that's a big red flag. We can look at the physical signs as well. So if you're experiencing any physical signs like headaches, gut tension, maybe adrenal fatigue, the body can sometimes show up stuff before we're aware of that. If you're feeling wired but tired, we talked about that early And if you wake up in the morning just not feeling refreshed, that's important because that can reflect that HPA axis strain and that emotional energetic overload. The other one is if we're dreading our client days, and that should be a no-brainer, but it is. If we're procrastinating about getting stuff done, avoidance is not a bad thing. Procrastination is something like, oh, I'm a procrastinator. Avoidance and procrastination can just be your reaction to a system that's overloaded. And that's what your body's saying, hey, I don't want to do this right now. But how we can overcome avoidance and procrastination in one of the ways you can, it's a very complex topic, but is helping yourself understand, are you feeling refreshed? Are you feeling restored in your life in general and in your practice? Because if you are, that avoidance and that procrastination usually doesn't rear its ugly head. Because our body's not saying, no, this is too much, because that's its way it does it. They're those different symptoms. 3 micro practices that you can do daily. So I'd love you to check these out and see which ones that feel good for you. 3-minute coherence breath before session. So that's just we talked about the breathing last time. Slow inhale for 4 or 5 seconds, slow exhale, and focusing on the heart. That's just a very small thing we can do in between sessions. One other thing you can do as a micro practice, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is doing one screen-free meal. Maybe you do it at breakfast, maybe you do it at dinner, whatever, but just one screen-free meal where you're just present. And that will keep you, if you're on the screens, it will keep you in the sympathetic activation phase. So the digestion can be supported by just sitting with your meal. You can start your cortisol and give yourself a little bit of mental space. And that will start support building resilience. So just try it for one day, maybe one meal, and maybe see if you can challenge yourself to increase it over time. Do the 2 minutes of shaking. So we can do a breath reset and just do this reset shaking ritual between clients, shaking your hands, your legs, your body. You can make, if it's going to look weird to your other staff members you're working with, maybe just do a little dance, put some music on your earbuds and maybe dance it out. That can be supportive. And then you really allow yourself to do some long exhales after that. There's also a weekly and monthly recharge. So there are more deep resets that I highly encourage people to do. A nature day, I know it's like the dead of winter at the recording of this course, but even going outside in the wintertime, just being present with the cold, the trees, the whatever nature is around you. Epsom salt bath and intention setting is also very supportive for folks who are needing that time to just give that space to themselves. We talked about peer supervision and co-regulation circles. I think that in general, if you don't do that for massage, I find it to be the most powerful thing that we can do as a culture right now, and being with other people, whether it's through a congregation or a club or at a gym class. I think those are really important ways that we can, again, connect with people that truly connect, whatever that may look like for you, and having a safe space, a space that is safe for an intimacy level of connection, that you feel like these people get me, that can really help. And you can build that connection, intimacy over time with friends and colleagues and other people out in your community. And that's where you can then support each other with emotional residue that's building up, not just in your practice, but in the world. I mean, there's a lot going on. So that can be very supportive. And then my favorite one is a creative outlet. I love art, dance, journaling, drawing, taking photographs, singing, music. I'm just a very creative person. And there was definitely a time on my journey that I was absolutely burned out. Absolutely. And this is like a lived experience for me going through this journey. Anyone that has been through the pandemic, and if you run your own practice, there's a lot of taking a lot of extra time doing admin work that you weren't normally doing. We had the great resignation of massage therapists that were all leaving practices, teachers, nurses, everyone was just saying, I don't want to do this anymore. So if you were in a practice that you own, or you were even working with one, you might have had a shortage of massage therapist staff. There was a shortage nationwide for us. I was getting opportunities and letters in the mail to work everywhere, and there was less time for me to do these practices, and I was absolutely burned out. So another sign is if you have no energy to do anything creative or fun, that's another sign that you're burned out. bringing that back online, I say the life force is this creative element of ourselves, of who we are, that energy to dance, to move, to sing, to laugh, to take engage in activities that are creative. And maybe you don't find yourself an artist, but maybe creative meaning putting together a cool outfit, or creative making a new recipe up, or playing around with recipes that you find on the internet. Anything that is your expression of making something or creating something, that can be very supportive for enhancing mood and flow, and then even emotional processing, getting into a flow state, drawing, those coloring books are really great. So I think that those are awesome ways to support the system. Integration and reflection, so peer support and accountability. I talked about this, but I think that we definitely have this need for co-regulation. And if we don't have a peer support network, then we can normalize this stress and burnout. It just becomes normal. And I'm seeing that in the world with everything, not just our career, right, as a massage therapist. It's kind of normal to feel like, oh, I got to go to work on Monday, right? And it's becoming a cultural thing, like, oh, I got to get my extra cup of coffee. Oh, yeah, my boss is toxic, or whatever. There's a toxic work environment. This is one thing that I feel that if we have more awareness around whether we work for someone else or we are a leader in some sort of entrepreneur in a field, we can change those things. And I think normalizing these work environments that are supporting burnout are not good. And that's why a lot of corporations are putting money and investing into corporate health and wellness programs to support and avoid burnout, which a lot of it will be education on these things, and hopefully educating their leaders and their structure of their organization to change the way things are done, like potentially having breaks at 90 minutes for the flow state period, so they can have more productivity and less burnout and less call off. So many things that are all integrated in there. But when we have that peer support, this is where we can have that accountability for self-care. So even if you get a bunch of friends together, other colleagues, to have a day that you guys go get worked on, that you do it together as friends, or you trade. That's also very important. I encourage you to think about someone right now that could be your peer buddy, that could support you in either meeting monthly, chatting monthly, sharing the things that have been challenging you to stay consistent with your self-care. Because number one thing, hands down, in this industry and in the caring and helping industry in general, which is the mind body program that I have created for burnout, is this is the main foundation, is overgiving and under supporting the self. And it is deeply rooted in patterns, like we talked about culturally, and that regulation is absolutely not there, because we can start it just like you start going to the gym for your New Year's resolution, right? It's a new habit. There's a window of tolerance you have for your normal regulation, or your normal rhythm of life. And then putting something new in there, putting a new habit in, like going to the gym, it's easy to fall off the wagon with that, right? Just with that kind of goal. So like another example is like taking supplements, and you take new supplements. Did you forget to take them? How do you stay consistent with that? So I think that we have good intentions for starting our self-care practice, and especially when we can understand with this course how important it is to have it, and how amazing and nourishing it is. Once you start doing it, it sort of supports this feedback loop of wanting to do it more. Because then you realize, wow, what I noticed changes in our clients I worked with and coached, practitioners and other massage therapists and our team, is they will have like a better rapport with their clients. They even increase their tips, because the clients sense this. They sense an energetic vibrancy and resilience, and they want to come back. Their quality of care, that the service they're getting is better. They're more excited to learn new modalities and be able to integrate them. They're able to go home and have a great reset with their family or their social life. That work-play balance is there because they're aware of all these things. And so it doesn't just support our field and continuing to help us not burn out after 7 years, but it continues to support way beyond the practice and way beyond your clinic room, right? So if you get that peer support buddy, it's important, right? That you can meet monthly, share your challenges, share what your wins are, practice the regulation tools together. You can have them take this course or share some of the things you've learned, and then just reminding each other to rest and cheer each other on. I think that the accountability and the kindness of supporting each other through that peer support is regulating in itself, but also just helping each other to remember to do the things that you say you're going to do as a new habit. because it may be a new habit for you. And even if you are someone that does a lot of self-care, maybe you want to increase that self-care or integrate some of these practices. So that could be supportive to have another person to help you stay with it. So if we're, let me see here. We'll go back to resources. I have some resources for you guys next if you need a little bit more information on some of the things I've talked about, because there's so much more to this course than just the stuff we talked about. If you can't tell, it's my greatest passion. The core progression here for this course, we talked about self-regulation and self-awareness. Self-awareness is the biggest thing here with all of this stuff. If you can take away one thing from this course, is just self-awareness in general. That leads to self-regulation, and self-regulation leads to energy resilience. It's one of those things where once you see something you do, you can't unsee it. Eventually, after you keep noticing that, hey, after this client I see, this is how I feel, and you keep noticing, you may not make changes in your behavior or remembering to integrate a tool right away, but just keep that self-awareness, that tracking. If you use the tracking tools, that will eventually, not just in this, but everything you do in your life, if you have the awareness as the first part, once you become aware of it, you can't unsee it. It becomes so like in your face. You're like, okay, I'm going to make some behavior changes here or do something different. So that's part one, that awareness. We learned again, what is empathy, the neuroscience of it, how the nervous system co-regulates mirror neurons. We talked about neuroception, heart-brain coherence, and how we personally sense others. So part two, as a recap, we talked about regulation. This is where I'm curious to hear in the chat any of the somatic grounding techniques or the integration tools that you used and that you loved, or if you have any questions about that. We'll move into questions here in a second. We talked about boundary visualization, shifting brain and body states, the nonverbal presence of how you're sitting, what your facial expressions are, how your tone of voice is, the pace or the rhythm of your tone of voice. I notice I have a couple amazing staff that are incredible with their technique, incredible with their bedside manner, incredible with their intakes and the content that they go over their intakes. But what I notice them doing with their clients is they talk really, really fast. Their tone isn't paced, and that not only dysregulates the client, but then the mirror neurons and the emotional contagion back and forth. Their anxiety is starting to then pass back and forth, and then they are noticing that they're more stressed and more burned out and more energetically fatigued after a day of clients like that. So we coached with them, and they did an amazing job slowing down the way they're talking, because when they slow down consciously, they feel more relaxed in their body. Thus, the client is more relaxed. They feel that they're coming off more confident. The client is perceiving that, and the quality of their work that's already amazing. They're coming back, and they have their booking rate has increased, and they've increased their tips. So it's a really cool thing to see how it all ripples out. And then, of course, for part three here, this is where we can open up some questions. But we talked about the burnout science and why we're more susceptible to burnout, the recovery cycles from the flow states, and what types of things we can do to support our self-care and the science of our self-care. I have a couple resources here. Let's see. If you want to learn a little bit more, there's so much more here. But if you want some science and grounded-based resources, there's some really great books here. How Emotions Are Made, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. Those are really great science. They're therapist friendly. They're not too sciencey if you're not someone that's very academically minded. Somatic and Trauma are these are my favorites. Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk. That's something that I highly encourage any body-based therapist to learn that and have some information that they can read up on them. There's obviously podcasts as well. We'll talk about that. And energy sensitivity, the highly sensitive person. Again, there's so many more books out there. You can happy to put things in the chat too if you have any books or resources or podcasts that might be supportive to anyone else here. Boundaries and burnout. So if you struggle with that, these are three great options. The Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown is more so understanding that self-awareness of emotions. So we usually think about emotions in like happy, sad, angry, but there's a lot more. There's more language. And if we have more language to understand how we're feeling and what we're being impacted by, then we can actually take that's again that self-awareness to the next step of changing behavior and seeing how things are impacting us. So I included her book on that too. Heart, brain coherence, and vagal tone. Here's a couple options. And then I talked a bit about the color medicine as well. The Flow Research Collective is great. Flow, that's a great book. Estrogenic Medicine. And I talked a little bit about Dr. Robert Melillo and neurodivergence and energy sensitivity. I talked about that. I have a series for highly sensitive people and empaths for the Mind Body Detox podcast. So that's a podcast I host and bring different guests and doctors on from all over the world. We talk about everything mind body medicine. And that is a great resource if you want to look at episodes 79, 87, 96, 101, 103. There's more on there, but that's something that might be supportive for you. So before we go into questions, I'm going to close here that the path to energy resilience and mastery begins with self-awareness. That awareness guides self-regulation. Self-regulation then restores coherence, and coherence is what sustains our capacity to heal. So the more we know ourselves, the more we can shape our work. And our work is pretty incredible. The power of touch at this time in our world where we need regulation through touch, through embodiment. Our culture is a mental culture. We are lost in our heads and we have lost track of our bodies and our emotions. We've numbed out, we're burned out. And I think coming back to the body and embody-based practices are going to become more and more needed. Industry for us is going up tremendously, so we need less burnout. We need more than 7 years in this field. But the more we know ourselves, that's where we can learn to stop overgiving. Where do we need to set boundaries? Where do we need to regulate ourselves? So it's important that this sensitivity that you could have, if you're drawn to this, or you're starting to have more sensitivity, empathy, the mirror neurons, all the stuff that you've been experiencing that might be leading to your feeling fatigue, it's not a flaw. It's just an instrument that needs tuning, it needs rest, it needs intentional care, awareness of your limits, and you need to be the musician who knows how to play your instrument. So this is where we just keep checking in. Notice what are your energetic patterns? What drains you? What restores you? Where do you lose your boundaries? And where does your body speak to you? Where are you mirroring? Where are you picking up things? Or where's your body telling you this is too much? I think when we know ourselves as therapists, this is when we can show up more fully for our clients. This is where we can access our clarity, prevent burnout, and strengthen our boundaries naturally. So the goal is to feel less overwhelmed, work longer with happier careers. And what I find interesting is I had a local hospital call me that want me to come teach this course. Like I discussed in part 1, the neuroscience of empathy and these words we said that were considered woo-woo. Like when I went to school, I had this where awareness was fully online, and I was asking my massage professors or instructors, how do I manage this? And there was a lot of deflecting. This is a woo-woo thing. We don't, I don't know, it's not really a thing. And it is a thing. We know it's a thing. We think you're experiencing on an everyday basis. So I think it's really cool that I'm getting medical professionals that are talking to me every day. That I just talked to a OBGYN that's like, I'm burned out, I'm sensitive, I'm empathic. She's using these words, empathic, I'm highly sensitive. Like 10 years ago, I was considered the woo-woo one. And I think you guys might also relate to that too. So we just have different language to express and explain what's happening. And that's why I love science, that we can have this language that can be integrated into our practice, because you might have clients that are experiencing this stuff too. And you can use the body-based awareness practices and your body work to help them within your scope of practice, which is really, really cool. So I'm ready and open for final questions. If you need to reach me, you can find me on, I am on Instagram. You can find me at Kara Loveheart. You can find me on the Mind Body Detox podcast. You can email me about courses, about teaching. I travel. I have online stuff, and you can always give us a call. But I'm here, Veronica, for any questions that I'll pull up this too. It's a little, yeah, hard to read that slide. But I'm open for questions if anybody has anything in the chat. Oh, thank you, Veronica, for posting the podcast right there. I really appreciate that. You're very supportive there.
Yes, no problem. Thank you so much, Kara, for such an awesome presentation. I learned a lot too, just from being here. Okay, great. So we'll open up the chat. If anyone has any questions, whether it be from today's session or any of the sessions prior in the weeks prior, feel free to ask. And then actually, let me put Kara's information also in the chat if any of you want to reach out directly to her with any questions that might come up after. Again, if this course, the final exam will be posted tomorrow. So you can take the final exam as well as this video recording. You can rewatch it. And the final exam will be posted tomorrow for your certificate for CEUs. And you could find that on your account page through the My Courses tab. I will go ahead and, is this Firefly Hollow CE?
Yes. Yep. And you'll reach out. We have a CE director that supports our CE program. So you'll be connecting with her, but she'll connect you with me directly if you have questions for me. Yeah, I'm curious, Veronica, while maybe people are taking time to type, because I know that sometimes it takes time and there's sometimes a lag with live streams. I'm curious what you learned today and like what was supportive for you. I know you've been a massage therapist for a while.
Yes. No, thank you. Yes, I have been a massage therapist for a while, since 2017, and I've also gone through a lot of what you were saying resonated with me, where there was definitely a lot of times where there are ebbs and flows of like, oh my gosh, this is so much work. I'm so overwhelmed. What do I do? And then there were also moments of realizing, what my own self-care practices are. Like for example, I love to cook. So I found that, maybe after a particularly long day or maybe stressful day or unexpected day, something like that, I would always be like, okay, well, like, what am I going to go home and cook? And like kind of use that to kind of shift me out of the, I have to work state, I have to take care of my patients, and into kind of like, okay, now it's time to settle back into how I'm doing.
Yes. The self-care goes down when the over-care for others goes up, and it's the depletion of that load of care.
Totally. And then I have a question while we're waiting here, and that this may be helpful for people, especially for those who couldn't make it live. We actually had quite a few signups from here from Australia. So that's kind of interesting to think it's probably morning time there.
Yeah, good morning.
But I had kind of a question around like navigating within like a client setting. So for example, a lot of times clients come to us as massage therapists to relieve their burnout. Maybe they're experiencing burnout in their jobs. And, like you were saying in your earlier sessions and in this session, we take on a lot of that. But where is kind of, would you say, or would you give advice in terms of, the kind of advice that maybe we can offer as therapists? Maybe it might be something as simple as, like you said, maybe you can tell them, oh, after maybe your long meeting, maybe just shake your hands or do some, go outside for 10 minutes, Is it in our scope of practice to offer that? And also kind of, is it within our scope of practice to talk about our own experience with burnout, or how to kind of manage, sharing with the client, your experience of burnout without, kind of crossing a line or staying within what feels comfortable and professional?
Right. I think if you choose to share your personal stories of burnout, that is really up to your own professional confidence and your own boundaries with how am I sharing this information without oversharing, because there's obviously circumstances and very minute details that might move out of that professional boundary of client patient relation or patient practitioner relationship. So if you feel that it's more comfortable for you to use the example of your story, You can even say, if you don't want to share your personal example of, I know someone that has this as the example, or if you have other people that you know, other clients that are experiencing the same thing, sometimes just witnessing and letting them know they're not alone, that can be great. And then you can support them in getting a professional. We have a lot of resources here. We have a psychotherapist that specifically works with burnout and soul care. So she works with ministers, pastors, nurses, teachers, and people who are in the healing profession, the caretaking profession. So we're really fortunate. I did a couple episodes of the podcast with her. Her name is Allie Kokert. So she's a psychotherapist and a licensed counselor. So we have that as a resource because that's obviously beyond our scope of practice. But I think that's always cool to tell them if you have resources that can support them in making a plan. But if they are burned out and it's because there's so many factors that we can't go into that's in our scope, right? But I think supporting them in their session goals. So if their session goals say, I'm burned out, asking them, do you know what types of things, how does it feel in your body? What is your body feeling as far as where you're holding the tension? Because I can work on that area. And when we're on the session on the table, do you want me to check in with you during the session to see how aware are you, a scale of 1 to 10 of that area of the body? Because maybe your client disassociates. And so you can bring awareness back to the body when you're working on them. Or they might say, you know what, I want to check out today. I need to be on the table, I need to fall asleep. So it's going to be up to the individual. But if your goal as a practitioner is to help them meet their goals within your scope, and if we're helping the body relax and downregulate, we're going to support inevitably that person's burnout. Because a lot of times they cannot regulate their systems. So they're unable to get into the body. They're in their head. They're the clients that are talking, just talking, or they're cycling on the hamster wheel in their head. So if you notice they're doing that, or you ask them questions, what is it like on the table for you? And if they're saying, I can't stop thinking, then you can ask them questions. Would it help you if when I'm working on your leg, I can bring awareness to, say, this lower calf? Like, how aware are you of a scale of 1 to 10 of the calf? Are you in your head? Are you somewhere else? And then would you like deeper pressure to bring more of that proprioception, that awareness, interoception of the body? Proprioception too, of three-dimensional space and time, where they're at. So that can be supportive, because you'll notice that clients that are not aware of their body and they need that deep pressure, it's either medications, pain meds they're on, but a lot of times it's because they're disassociated. Does that help answer the question there?
Yeah. No, that was a great answer. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always bringing it back to the body. Our scope of practice is where the muscular system connect to the nervous system, because it's all interconnected there, and how can feathering, jostling, like I do different techniques for trauma and chronic stress in the restorative touch class, which ones to identify as your client in fight, flight, fawn, freeze based on these symptoms, or a combination, because we have all of them, and what techniques support somatically getting them out of that space. So it's interesting that the question that you're answering, a full 8-hour CE courses answers that more in depth. But yeah, it's cool stuff. That's all I've been working on for a long time, is neurodivergence, hypersensitivity, trauma. And I like to put chronic stress in that, because some people will never identify as having trauma. But I say trauma, in my definition, is a nervous system that's not able to regulate. Whether it's dissociated or it's overstressed, hypervigilance, it's not able to do that. And our job as therapists is to help them get back in their bodies, help them feel relaxed, get better sleep through the outcomes of our work, release muscle tension. And sometimes that even includes coaching them breathing through the practice. That's also within our scope, if you want to breathe with me in this. So that's that diaphragmatic breath. So some of the techniques that you learn somatically are appropriate to help coach them with on the table, because we're working with, how does this somatic practice help relieve the muscle tension, or even just jostling the arm to help this rigidity and maybe a joint rotation that we're trying to move. If these somatic practices and techniques are helping you do your work with the muscles, you're staying within your scope, in my opinion. So if someone thinks differently, I'm always open, because there's always perspectives that we don't know or not aware of that. But I say err on the side of caution. If you're ever unsure, ask a colleague.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What a great answer. I could tell you're so very passionate about this and very like well researched. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your
Yeah.
knowledge. It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat, but check out Kara's podcast, Mind Body Detox. I left the link in the group chat, and it'll also be here on the final slides for when you need to revisit. You can always reach out to her directly if you have questions, or you can reach out to us here at support@neilasher.com, and we can also forward questions to Kara if anything comes up. Thank you so much for being here live, and thank you for being with us during the recordings. And I think that's it. Any last words, Kara?
No, thank you guys so much for joining us. And I hope that you take one thing away from this, that self-awareness to continue to build upon, because that over time will help you, again, with that resilience and keep your longevity of all the good work you're doing.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Kara. Thanks for your time and have a good night.